if we were to create a massive 33 building, 11-story complex, housing, cheap for people who can't afford it, to replace tenement housing, it can work if you go to the people who are destroying it and mercilessly beat them in public when they do. Because that's how Singapore maintains what you're talking about. You keep
EconBoi wants light beating.
What about the city of Houston, Tim?
You keep trying.
What about the city of Houston, Tim?
You keep trying.
What about the city of Houston, Tim?
You keep trying to exclude the enforcement of law from the things we're spending money on.
I didn't. I just said you need an enforcement of these things. I just don't think beating them in the street is right. What about the city of Houston, Tim? I agree.
In this video, a libertarian claps back at Tim Pool's insane delusions. Cameron Barrett, also known as EconBoi, just calmly shuts down one of Tim Pool's most ridiculous housing rants yet. While Tim Pool leans into this weird authoritarian fantasy where public housing only works if you punish poor people with humiliation or public beatings, Cameron just keeps it real. He brings up actual policy examples like Houston and France to prove you can run successful programs without turning into a police state. It's a perfect showcase of one guy chasing control through cruelty and the other just offering real-world solutions that actually hold up. So make sure to watch till the end to see how a libertarian claps back at Tim Pool's insane delusions.
We don't need to beat them in the street. The point I said was don't use Singapore as an example because that's how they enforce it.
I used Houston as an example.
Then we agree that if Houston has social enforcement, you will lose your house if you vandalize it. You will be kicked out. Then people stop doing these things.
Yeah, well, Tim,
we have in these cities like Portland needles all over the street.
Yeah.
We can compromise on compassionate beatings.
Well, Tim, I mean, obviously, I don't know that. Look, I'm not. I'm from Texas, not Portland, right? So maybe I remember I had a friend. This is a funny story. I had a friend who she was from Texas as well. She worked in San Francisco for a while, and she's super woke, liberal, socialist type. And she comes back from San Francisco, and she's like, honestly, they're way too far. Like they're way more woke than even like your Texas socialists, I guess, which is kind of funny to think. So I'm from Texas. I'm not from San Francisco. If you say, hey, you can't like start beating the shit out of people and breaking windows and doing drugs if you're going to be in social housing, I'm not going to have a huge problem with that. If we look at the city,
beatings.
Well, yeah, if we look at the city of Houston, which is why I use that as an example. This is a city that can't raise a lot of taxes. They have to come up with creative solutions to do things, and they did that. And obviously, they did that without the extreme social policies of Singapore, right?
But still enforcement.
But Tim, I've never said we shouldn't enforce.
I didn't say you did. I said don't use Singapore as the example because they do.
Tim, what did I use Singapore as an example for?
Public housing market.
Yeah.
And I said, don't use it as an example because they maintain it by beating people in public.
Through vicious beatings, not compassionate
They also maintain it through public investment.
We're three communists here sharing our love of communism. This is sarcastic for the sake of the clippers.
Say it one more time, and that'll be last.
You don't need to spend as much money on property when it's not being vandalized because you beat the people mercilessly in public if they do.
Okay.
If the cost of Pruitt-Igoe was $100 million to fix because of the vandalism, and the cost to fix the Singaporean is $1 million because of the merciless beatings, one can be sustained and one cannot.
Yes, we need to be centrist about this.
I must say this. I must add, I can solve the gang violence and shooting problems in Chicago like that.
I'm curious.
Constitutionally?
No. If the punishment for shootings in Chicago was they would force you to wear a diaper and a baby bonnet and make you crawl across Roosevelt Avenue while saying, I'm a big baby boo-boo on camera while everyone got to watch and throw popcorn at you, not a single one of these people would commit that crime.
Alright, so it starts off with Tim trying to defend this idea that punishment, specifically public humiliation or violence, is the missing ingredient in public housing success. And the wild part isn't just that he floats on this idea, it's how he confidently builds up a whole narrative about it. Like he seriously tries to justify Singapore's housing success by crediting merciless enforcement rather than, massive government investment, regulated planning, or functioning public institutions. It's just such a cartoonish misread of actual policy and it just sounds like parody at this point. But then he just keeps on going. He says he's fine with people getting kicked out for vandalism, which is already a normal enforcement practice, but then just slides right back into pushing these dystopian, compassionate beatings, like that's a meaningful contribution. Meanwhile, Cameron just stays calm and makes the smarter point here. He brings up that Houston, which unlike Singapore, operates under tighter budget constraints, doesn't rely on police state tactics, and still manages to enforce housing standards through clear consequences and efficient policies. That's what real solutions look like. not whatever Tim's selling. And notice that Cameron keeps pulling back to the outcomes, not the vibe, not the fantasy, just what works. His example of Houston isn't just a name drop, it's a demonstration that you can maintain public housing with fairness, not just fear.
I disagree. There's sexual fetishists out there that would enjoy this. So.
You're correct.
They won't bring back the tomato.
My point is,
public shame.
a lot of what people assume is gang violence in Chicago is actually honor shootings.
Sure.
When people feel disrespected, they kill each other. And this is a total aside. I just wanted to bring it up in the context.
No, you're right.
If we did have cruel and unusual punishment, and what I mean by that is not torturous, maiming, or anything like that, but literally, we're going to make you wear a diaper and bunny hop down the street, and then you're done.
Sure.
That's all you do over one weekend. People would be like, hell no, I ain't coming that
But
crime.
Tim, this is where we get into an argument about authoritarianism versus liberalism or libertarianism philosophically, where are we talking about like an individual society where people are free to live with maximal liberty, or are we talking about authoritarian society? And here's the thing, as much as I'm for compassionate beatings, you know, I'm a huge fan of this, I still like living in a relatively speaking free society. This is why I can travel to see you. This is why I can, you know, speak my mind on a public platform, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm looking for the balance between freedom and security, and I'm trying to do that as best as I can. That's kind of what we're arguing about from a policy perspective. But Econo, you say that I'm dragging away from things, but I'm going to drag it away one more time, okay? So let's say that ideally in major metropolitan areas, we allow cops, firefighters, EMTs, and retail and service workers who actually make the city function to live in low-cost housing so they can make the city function, okay? I get it, socialism, communism, whatever, Chak and Spurg out. However, if we see a correlated collapse in the birth rate, where our major urban centers actually have like, I don't know, a less than 2.15 birth rate, what I would probably say is that that's bad urban design. It's a bad culture, and we shouldn't be incentivizing it. And I do think that the United States, not just the United States, I think the entire globe needs to stabilize from a population perspective in order for us to be a species.
We can tie these two things together, right? So, for instance, I think there was some evidence out of France. They studied their child allowance program, right? So it's like, hey, when you give people cash, like one of the reasons why people don't have kids, right, is because, well, they just don't feel like they can afford it, right? Obviously, that's a big reason. Or they might have less kids than they otherwise would.
Isn't that kind of like sorry, continue. But I feel like this is like a reported thing versus like a demonstrated thing. But I'll listen.
Well, I was about to get to the evidence, right? So France had this child allowance program, and they essentially some mumbo jumbo with the study design. I don't want to get into it, but they found that this actually increased the number of French people by like millions of people over a long period of time. Right?
What did?
Well, their child
beatings.
We agreed on compassionate beatings, Tim.
They're child benefits programs, right? Okay. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that France has like this booming population. It just means that they'd have a much lower than otherwise population if not for these benefits, right? And so the welfare state is perfectly compatible, especially when we're talking about the birth rate. You know, look, paid parental leave.
How do we optimize that?
All right. Well, I can tell you, right? Paid parental leave, cash benefits when you have kids, having baby boxes that we send to people. How
do you reconcile that?
Public school.
How do you reconcile that with so for instance, like all of these things I think any sensible social conservative should be for. You should be for high quality early childhood education because you want a smart population. You should be for high quality education because you want a productive population. You should be for people getting socialized and becoming intelligent and all that kind of stuff and getting a good education. So these things I'm perfectly fine with. But what I'm asking though is an optimization, because what you're talking about.
Well, I can tell you. Let me answer your questions
real quick, just because I want to complete a thought. You're saying that it increased millions of people. So there are millions of people who were born through social welfare programs that would otherwise not have been born. That's awesome. Is it still below 2.15? Because if we're below 2.15, I think we have a problem.
So Tim doubles down hard here and honestly just lets the mask drop. The diaper and bunny hop punishment rant sounds like a joke at first, but he literally frames it as a policy solution for crime. Like some kind of humiliating carnival punishment is gonna solve systematic violence. It's not even about deterrence at this point. It's about control through shame. And while he tries to walk it back with some freedom talk later, it's super clear the appeal of the authoritarian instinct is just baked in. The second he feels like society is losing discipline, his first instinct is public degradation, not reform. That's not serious policy, that's just punishment. Cameron, on the other hand, just keeps things locked into actual solutions again. This time on birth rates and economic insecurity. He brings up France's child allowance program, which actually led to millions of additional births over time. And he does it without hype or idealism, just calmly laying out that cash support and welfare systems work when they're targeted at people who are actually struggling. When folks feel like they can afford kids, they're just more likely to have them. Simple. He even backs off any fantasy about reversing birth declines entirely. Just emphasizes how smart policy can slow it down and prevent worse outcomes. You don't need any threats. You just need paid leave, direct support, and early education. The stuff Cameron lays out clearly here.
Yeah, well, Connor, obviously, so we can look at the most extreme example, perhaps Hungary, right? So Hungary spent on just family benefits, right? They spent like 6% of their GDP. We said earlier in this conversation, the United States spends 3.5% of its GDP on its military.
Right.
So imagine twice the U.S. military. That's the effort that the Hungarians are putting into getting people to have kids.
As a pronatalist, I will accept this as a part of your plan.
Right, right. Now, I think we should have very generous child benefits, but obviously it's not a panacea, right? For instance, like one of the reasons why
Didn't they bump up temporarily by like 0.1 or 0.2 and then they drop back down?
It has like an all else equal effect. Like there's more people having kids in Hungary than otherwise, but obviously it doesn't completely reverse the problems. A lot of it is culture. Like, why do Mormons have more kids in Utah than like people in Texas? Well, they're
going to populate the stars.
Right. Yeah. Well, they have this sort of conservative fundamentalism, and they, on average, let's say they want to have more kids.
So what you're saying is we should lie to people and tell them that if they have a ton of kids, we will all populate the stars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
Texas,
what I'm saying. Like, I do agree.
Texas.
Taxes.
That's kind of what Hungary does, and it still doesn't have, it doesn't reverse the effect. So,
Tim, I agree with it in
good.
principle, but that's exclusively going to affect like the most intelligent people who are.
If you are married,
have 2 or 3. Yeah.
If you are married and have at least 2 children, no taxes.
well, but Tim, again, that's kind of what Hungary does, and it just doesn't, like, financial reasons are only.
Still think it should be done.
Well, yeah, but financially, like. Financial reasons are only so big a portion of why people are not having kids, right?
Sure.
And so even if we have a lot of benefits, they're not going to have a ton of kids altogether. I think that,
Do you believe getting on a culture? Sorry, I know we're talking about economics; it's your strong suit. But getting onto culture, I feel like there is a antenatal popular like wing, especially on social media, of the left, where like liberals and progressives effectively say, your life is for you. There's no afterlife. So what you need to do is you need to maximize your pleasure in this life and you need to minimize your pain.
Yeah.
And so as a result, don't have kids.
Sure.
And so I think that this combined with the technologies of condoms and the technologies of birth control, that partially contributes to it. So for my thing is like, are you pronatal? Are you going to have kids?
I mean, well, yeah, I don't want to talk about my family planning.
Well,
obviously.
I want to.
I'd hope I'd have kids one day. Okay. But anyway, the point is though, is that
How old are you?
I'm 28.
Okay.
Yeah, so not an old man like Connor over here.
Yeah, but I have two. I have 2 kids.
I actually do want to stress this too. I fully admitting I just had my first kid this year. 28 is old to have a kid historically.
Yeah. I mean, obviously,
I'm way
historically, yeah, historically that's true. I mean, but I think when we talk about collapsing birth rates, actually, that's a good segue. Is that when we talk about like birth rate collapse, what you find is really not that people are just. How do I put this? It's not that people are like deciding to have less kids necessarily. When you look at birth rates by age cohort, right, you see that it's
delayed.
Well, essentially what you find is that the reason why we have birth rates declining is because teenagers aren't having kids anymore.
Which
right?
is
overwhelmingly the reason why birth rates are declining is because we don't have teenage pregnancy.
20-year-olds aren't either.
Well, 20 to 24 are going down as well, and part of that is because women entering the workforce, getting an education. I think that this is why it kind of bumps into what Connor was saying earlier, which is like, look, at the end of the day, the welfare state cannot solve all issues. And when we're talking about like, oh, women aren't having as many kids because they're deciding to work and get educations, I mean, like, what are we supposed to do about that, guys?
So by the end of all this, Cameron just basically walks away with every point of his just intact. He explains why birth rates can't be fixed with just the general tax gimmicks or cultural shame. He backs it with actual policy data, like Hungary's massive family benefit spending, which still couldn't fully reverse declining trends. That's the reality Tim never really addresses. He keeps looking for cultural villains or moral decay to blame, while Cameron's over here breaking down the economics, the demographics, and the structural drivers that actually matter here. And that's what this whole debate just exposes. When Tim's faced with complex problems like housing or population decline, Tim just retreats into fantasy punishments and finger pointing, while Cameron just sticks with what works, even if it's not flashy. Because when one side brings tested ideas and the other just brings diaper cosplay, it's clear who's trying to solve the problem and who's just trying to moralize it. Funny how the guy yelling about delusions is the one clinging to them and his wild takes and bias. And speaking of bias, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.